Okay, so a fair amount of you were curious about Celtic mythology and its creation story, so here we go. A long time ago in an Ireland far, far away, the Great Void which superseded the rest of the universe produced two gods, a male by the name of Donn and a female by the name of Danu. From the moment these two first laid eyes upon each other, they became instantly attracted to one another to the point where Donn and Danu embraced themselves so tightly that nothing could separate them. Ironically enough, the void which preceded them had actually created the two for companionship, yet they just ended up ignoring him, and then the void became that one college roommate who always comes back to the dorm late, but there's always a sock on the doorknob because Donn was pretty much constantly giving Danu the business. Anyway, Danu soon became pregnant, surprise surprise, and gave birth to multiple children. Most notable of these were Brienne, Luchar, and Lucharba, who were described as giants among these children, and were the only ones with any sort of significance from what I've gathered. Anyway, remember what I just said about Donn and Danu being inseparable? Yes, that was supposed to be taken literally, to the point where these two wouldn't even let go of each other long enough for any of the children who just popped out of the womb to escape. So Brienne, doing the only sensible thing that he could, took out his sword, don't ask me where he got a sword, and then cut up his father into 9 pieces, so that he and his brothers could finally be free of the awkward situation. Of course, Danu was beside herself at the death of her husband by the hands of her son, so she began to cry. Like, a lot. Her tears flooded the earth, which conveniently exists for no reason at all now, and formed the seas. And her 3 giant sons, and all the other first children were swept away by their mother's tears. And to this day, Brienne, Luchar, and Lucharba became the landless princes, or the Foromag of the sea. In addition to all of her children, Danu's tears also washed away the cut-up body parts of Donn, where they all suddenly and magically became key elemental figures in the ancient Gaelic world. His head became the sky, his brain the clouds, his face the sun, his mind the moon, his bones the stones, and his breath the wind. To anyone keeping count, that's only 6 of the 9 parts of Donn. Also, don't ask me how Brienne was able to separate Donn's mind and breath from the rest of his body with his magical plot device sword. It's mythology. Not a whole lot is going to make sense. Anyway, the 7th part of Donn's corpse to fall to the earth was his blood, which mixed in with Danu's tears to form the thankfully HIV-negative seas, and finally his flesh, which I can only assume was the rest of him, fell to the earth and became the soil. The last part of him was either completely forgotten to time, or they were represented by 2 seeds, which in most versions don't even bother to explain where they came from. The text only reads, "Of his seed only 2 remained, one red and one white," although in some versions both seeds are acorns and both of them are red. So we can actually take this in a few different ways and imagine the 2 seeds falling to earth as either Donn's testicles, or much more innocently, just 2 parts of his sliced up body. Keep in mind that whatever they were supposed to be, they were both meant to be literal, actual seeds. Regardless of this mystery, Danu stopped crying long enough to see that somehow Donn was inside one of these 2 seeds. And so she started to cry again, causing the seeds to germinate and grow inside of the soil, formerly known as Donn's flesh. From there, out of the red seed, came a massive oak tree the ancients called Ochaida, and the other seed became a priest by the name of Finn, who would also serve as the brother of Donn, seeing as Donn is now Ochaida. Now Donn saw Danu crying up in heaven and stretched out his branches to her so that she could use his leaves to dry her tears and stop all the crying. Which, for the most part, wasn't actually a bad thing, because Danu's second round of crying also gave rise to the first humans out of Donn's soil. However, in some iterations of the myth, the first humans sprang out of the fruits which Ochaida grew out of his branches/arms. By the way, remember that Donn's present incarnation is described as a tree, because this brings up a rather interesting scenario later on. So, everything is coming into place and the world is becoming all peaceful, right? Well, there are a few complications. Most notably the small problem that the first humans could not die due to there being no underworld. So they basically just sat around all day and became lazy slobs because there was literally no reason for them to go out and hunt down food or really do anything with their endless, meaningless lives. So one day, Donn asked his brother Finn what they should do, and Finn, being Finn, had absolutely no idea. So he went out to sea in search of the meaning of life in an otherwise dead world. Poetic, I know. He came back empty-handed, but then suggested that Donn should die again so that his parts could be split up amongst the earth to rejuvenate life on the planet, and also to create a place for tired old souls to be put to rest. Naturally, Donn didn't care much for the idea of being cut up again, so he and Finn got into a scrap over it, where Donn eventually impaled Finn on his blades. Which means, yes, the earliest and self-described most epic fight of Celtic mythology was between a priest and his brother, a blade-wielding tree. I told you guys that Celtic mythology was awesome. Anyway, with Finn now dead, Donn was overcome by grief, and so his heart burst apart, along with the rest of his being, scattering the charred tree bits all over the earth. And soon after his death, 3 roots of Akhaida grew down into the earth, making room for a new dimension, the Underworld, a place for dead humans to go after their time was up. Donn then became the god of the Otherworld, and his brother Finn took charge of training deceased dogs to hunt down the souls of the dead and either lead them into the Underworld or curse them to roam the swamps for all eternity. Oh, and Danu is also still up in heaven, and Danu continues to love her despite being literally worlds apart from her, so yeah. A love story involving mortal combat with a tree, and children getting squished between their parents while they were constantly having sex. If that's not an A+ creation myth, I'm not quite sure what is.